Well, I feel like for every founder, the first investor is yourself.
Yeah.
Now you're saying I'm going to take either a pay cut or no pay, which is what we ended up doing for over a year or so. And I'm going to say that this is going to, at some point, either give me enough in knowledge or enough in monetary return. I think Facebook had just acquired Oculus at the time, but I think it's a great foresight on the side of Facebook, in the sense of like there's another platform coming, and being ahead is better than being behind. I would go to like almost every single like pitch kind of competition. I would go to all these different workshops, accelerators. Had this not been successful to the degree it is today, I would at least have that information and knowledge to maybe try something else or build a network.
Maybe at a corporate, or something.
Exactly. So I started to build this real strong conviction that like, A, we have a problem that we can solve, and then B.
Welcome to The Startup Leap, the #1 podcast interviewing startup founders who have taken the leap into starting their own businesses.
Here on The Startup Leap, we hear real, raw and relatable stories of these entrepreneurs, how they've navigated taking the leap and the decisions they've made. We're your hosts.
I'm Yvonne.
And I'm Maria.
And this is the Startup Leap podcast.
Yvonne and Maria are partners at Local Globe and OpenSeed VC, respectively. Local Globe and OpenSeed are independent of the Startup Leap podcast. Any statements made by Maria, Yvonne, or the Startup Leap guests are solely their view and are not advice. Endorsements by the Startup Leap, its guests, Maria and Yvonne.
Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Startup Leap, the #1 pod, where we share and speak with exciting entrepreneurs who've built and founded their own startup, navigating when, why, how they took the leap themselves. And through nuanced and insightful conversations, you can get insights as you take your leap, perhaps. It is so exciting to have our guests today, and we're your hosts. I'm Maria.
I'm Yvonne.
And we're so excited to have you here with us today. I think one of the interesting things about the guest we have today that gets me personally very excited is that he has the benefit of a long history of retrospective insights. He's built the startup that you will hear about in a second for the past 10 years. That brings nuanced insight that I think really helps to dig into, I guess, how decisions evolve over time. And I think the second thing that I personally find exciting as well is the fact that Seyi's built in a very exciting technological space. So it's an emerging technology, it's AR, it's VR, and he's not just built in that space, he's built in that space 10 years ago. I mean, AR and VR is like popular now, but if you think about 10 years ago, building something like this, especially in the B2B software space, there is a lot of nuance to the fact that he kind of went early in the market and navigating that till today. Another exciting thing is that he's raised across several funding rounds as well. His startup, and you will hear a bit about it in a sec, has raised over 40 million, has raised from incredible names, Serena Williams, like really exciting people. And I really also connect with, I guess, Seyi's vision of why he built GravitySketch and what it's trying to kind of become. So without any further ado, we're going to welcome Seyi, but I think I'm just going to go right into it, Seyi. I think I would just love to know, because I think first, 10 years is a long time to build anything. I mean, most marriages don't even last 10 years. And two, I think if you think about the evolution of AR and VR, in 2014, it was a very different world, especially with emerging technologies. I guess the rapid acceleration actually, it kind of compounds very quickly for emerging technology. So 2014 AR is very different from now. And so I'm just wondering, like, how does this Nigerian American move all the way from the US to the UK, go through the journey of starting from building actual physical products with your hands and then leading innovation and design at companies like Jaguar and Land Rover, and then you build your own thing, GravitySketch. I would love to hear what the world was like in 2014 with AR, VR. Did it sound crazy when you started? Like, what did you see? How did you navigate the fact that it was an emerging technology and very early at that time?
Yeah, I had to rewind until that point in time. It's quite a ways back. I would say at that time, 2014, I wasn't really into the technology itself. I was more into what potentially it could provide. And so I was really frustrated always trying to sketch something that looked three-dimensional so that we can have it manufactured or produced. And when we started to see augmented reality and virtual reality become very accessible through tech demos, it was like, oh, I wonder what the world would be like if I can just show the thing in 3D from the onset. without needing to kind of do a perspective sketch that looks really nice, that like someone can hopefully understand. And yeah, it was pretty weird space because you had to be like a developer to actually access this technology. You had to use Unity, and you had to go online and read a couple of forums or download some open source code and try to run the code to see if you can kind of pop up the image of what you were hoping to portray. So I don't think the mindset wise was like, let's start a business in this space, but more like, oh, this would be an amazing glimpse into the future, and maybe someday someone else will figure this out. But yeah, it was a very strange space because it was like very bulky, kind of not too dissimilar from what it is today, actually. Yeah. But like bulky headset and or like a webcam.
Was the headset mainstream at that time? Like what we know as AR, like the Oculus.
I think Oculus was. I think Facebook had just acquired Oculus at the time, and everyone's kind of why would they make such an acquisition, right? But I think it's a great foresight on the side of Facebook in the sense of like there's another platform coming. And being ahead is better than being behind. But if you look at the same time period as well, you saw that Microsoft was also acquiring companies during that time. And Apple was actually acquiring companies during that time. So if you read between the lines, you can kind of see that the industry was starting to at least prepare themselves for, the next wave of computing. If we think the current wave is mobile, I think the next wave is spatial computing.
So it's almost like you were just trying to solve a problem, but the technology was not there yet.
Yeah, exactly. And I personally like wires, cables, all that stuff is like that's not my thing at all. Like I prefer to be like in the factory or in the workshop. That's more my thing. But what it enables is undeniable. And so I couldn't just turn a blind eye to it.
No, definitely. So Seyi, take us back to your childhood. So you grew up in America, you were raised by American mom, your stepdad as well, who's Nigerian. I'd love to hear about your childhood and how your experience growing up in America shaped your identity and its relevance to GravitySketch today.
Sure, yeah. Let me see how I can connect it all. My stepfather is actually African American.
Okay.
Yeah, my biological father is Nigerian. I grew up with my stepfather. Well, I guess like starting with my parents' professions is probably the best place. Like my stepfather was a barber, but he's ex-Air Force. So he's quite strict in the house, but also the mentality that we had was like, if you don't cut hair that day, we obviously, you don't bring home money. And my mother was a teacher, but she's a Spanish teacher. So it's not like the highest priority in the school, right? It's more like if they need to cut a program, it's usually like the languages or the arts. And so there's often times where she would be substitute teaching or she would find like kind of side jobs. And I think watching your parents, I think be very open and also be very tactical about their employment or how they bring home money. I think it's pretty important for children. At least for us, it was really shaped our future because we were able to like understand what work provides, right?
And also build a work ethic, like the fact
100%.
that you actually have to create value in work,
Exactly, yeah. And so I think those are like the small things that I can kind of ladder up to my time. Maybe not GravitySketch and what we do at GravitySketch, but like in terms of me being a founder. And then small things, when my mother did have a side job, she would bring us with her, right? And she was actually doing like landscaping. So she would landscape for small businesses. And at the time, Nike had a very small store for the like factory employees. Right. And she was like landscaping at that business.
Oh, that must have been full circle.
It's a very cool full circle story.
So is that your first exposure to design then, essentially? Like just seeing that in action?
Yeah, if you go all the way back, I think the sneaker culture in my town specifically, because it's Portland, Oregon, is where I grew up, and that's in like the home of Nike. Kids definitely knew like, okay, this is patent leather, this is like when the Jordans had like the elephant kind of stretched leather. Like we were talking about materials in a way that I don't think, like I can't even think about why would we even start that conversation. You know what I mean? Like aside from like the shoe looks cool, but we were talking about all the details. So I think they had a huge influence, maybe not just on us as like a small city, but probably like my generation. Like bringing design to the forefront and like talking about like how your shoes are made and the materials that they're made and why it was designed that way. So that was really interesting.
Any insight, like any initial like hints of your entrepreneurial streak, like when you were younger? Was there anything that you kind of started thinking about or doing that kind of showed those early signs that you might do something like GravitySketch later?
From an entrepreneur's perspective, potentially. I mean, I think my mother and my father ripped off of me. My stepfather ripped off of me a lot.
Right.
Just being on the job site with her, and then after school, I'd always go to the barbershop. And so I'd sweep hair at the barbershop, right? And, you know, you get a tip from the tip, essentially. So, like, he worked with a bunch of other barbers, and I would sweep for everyone. And so you get a little bit of their tip. So it might be like $1 or, you know, 50 cents from their tip. And so then you realize, like, every seat you sweep, you know, if you can kind of compound it, you know how much you can, you know how much you can
collect those coins.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that was just like a spark. I was probably like 8 years old at that time, and that was a spark into like other things as we got older. You know, you just start thinking, okay, if we go to Costco with my mom, and if I get a box of juice, you know, the little juice packets, and I sell those at school, you can sell them for 50% margin, which is like pretty crazy. So
an early lesson
little
into
things like that.
into accounting, and
you see it all the time now. I mean, if you just take the metro in New York, you know, people selling candy bars and all that stuff. Like, I think it's a kind of common hustle that kids will kind of adopt. So those are probably like the earliest entrepreneurial things. But how do you take it from that to, you know, like raising money and you know, building a business with employees and all that? I think that's a huge leap. So I feel like a lot of us stay in that kind of hustle mentality. We don't really get beyond that. And I probably wouldn't have either had I not come about like this new technology space that I'm working in now.
So you actually spent some time in Taiwan as well. Tell us about your time in Taipei, and also how it shaped your worldview, and what impact it's potentially had on your view when shaping GravitySketch, if any at all.
Yeah, sure. So prior to coming to the UK and prior to even going to Taiwan, I was in the States, and I moved to New York to try to pursue more of like a creative discipline. I was a mechanical engineering background. And so I was getting a lot of gigs that were around like actual hardcore fabrication and manufacturing, which I thought was interesting. But the challenge I always faced was not having a say in the initial design. Obviously means that I'm kind of patching up someone else's maybe ignorance to, you know, how a material works or how a manufacturing process works. And so I moved to New York. So I was okay, there's like, that's pretty much like a design hub. It's either San Francisco or New York, and New York seemed to be like definitely more my speed. And there it was pretty interesting because it was almost too design. And so I found very often that people weren't quite in tune with the manufacturing processes, or
over-indexed more on the creation and the design.
Yeah, too far from the making.
And they're two different things now that you kind of say.
Yeah. Unless you're in fashion, because in fashion, like you can go to the seamstresses and everything. Like that's all kind of in Canal Street and you can just get on with it. And so I kind of kept feeling like I'm just so far away from like these two worlds actually meeting and connecting. And so I started to look into career paths that would get me closer to how things are made. And of course, vast majority of what we manufacture in the world is done abroad. It's done in China, Vietnam, and Taiwan was actually a really interesting location because they actually are doing a lot of the initial development and research before it gets lifted and mass produced.
Oh, interesting.
In China, yeah, exactly. So, so I found a couple of interesting companies there that were doing like I would say like the outsourced work for companies like HP and Microsoft and so forth. And one of the companies was open to giving me a shot and coming over to work for a bit in their team. And it was a perfect team for me because it was a mixture of engineering and design. So they would get the design brief, and then they would go to some of the smaller factories to simulate what the manufacturing process would be. And then they would scale that up in China, in Guangzhou, China.
And that's quite a big leap to move to a whole new continent to get that exposure.
Exactly.
I love that.
Did you speak any, it's a different language in Taiwan?
No, I didn't speak any Mandarin. My older brother actually studied Chinese culture and
But do you think
economics.
that influenced it a little bit?
Huge influence.
Okay.
Huge influence, because he was in
Did he spend any
Hong
time
Kong.
in Asia? Okay, cool. Okay.
He was in Hong
and
Kong
was
at
he
the
there
time.
at the same time you were in Taiwan?
Yeah. He was in China at the time when I moved to Taiwan. And he's still in China.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, he's fluent. If you heard him on the phone, you couldn't
tell.
Yeah, you wouldn't even know who he was.
that.
Yeah. So that was a good like. Okay, it's not too crazy if my older brother can kind of go out there and manage that. But I think ultimately as well, like getting outside of your comfort zone completely and like having no safety net kind of forces you to make certain decisions.
Find new parts of yourself even that you didn't even know was there.
Yeah, and I think I needed that. I was about 22 at the time.
Okay.
I definitely needed to just...
to try to do something like that,
Yeah, because in New York, I even have my cousin, so I can kind of have like a little bit of a backstop.
Yeah.
and just getting completely out and saying, okay, I need to do this on my own.
So that was part of the
was very
decision. You
good.
felt like you wanted to be almost forced out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, well,
by going there.
and also to get where I really wanted to
Yeah.
go. Like I wanted to see how things. Like I know how laptops are made. I know how phones are made. I've seen assembly lines. Like to actually have that insight that I felt was always missing in the design space in the States, or at least prior to like kind of getting that exposure. I was willing to take that level of a jump, and at the same time, I felt comfortable doing that. And my mother and my stepfather even encouraged me. Like it's
good.
you know, you could make that work because you have the work ethic to do that. You have the stamina to do that. And so I was kind of it was a bit nervous, but not like it wasn't crippling, right? Because like what is it, an airline ticket, and I know how to make money, you know.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
so,
I also think that some
yeah.
of that hustle spirit kind of reflects on that decision on being able to like go in a completely like new environment. You don't know what to expect, but you know that you will figure it out as you go.
Yeah, exactly. You have to have a lot of confidence in yourself.
Self-faith.
Yeah, and that's a hard thing actually for a lot of folks because like they usually
Doubt,
they like a lot of people will have one or two people that are in their corner all the time cheerleading them, but you know, without those people, can you still progress? 9 times out of 10, I believe you can. It's just mentally.
Just don't think you can.
Yeah, mentally can you? Yeah.
So 2 years in Taiwan, and then was
It
that
was about 3 years. 3 years.
3
almost.
years,
Yeah.
and then did you move to the UK after that, or did you go back to the US?
I did a short trip in the U.S. I worked for a furniture designer in New York just prior to coming to the U.K. And that was really just to kind of get back and get back into the swing of like the Western culture. I definitely enjoyed my time in the Eastern culture, but I was adopting a lot of the cultures and mannerisms and things like this. And I felt like, okay, let me get back home a little bit and kind of level set before mentally preparing to come to the UK, which was all of academics.
And
So I
why
came
the
here for
UK?
school.
Like you studied at Imperial, obviously. Why the UK? Because people usually make the move from the UK to the US.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear a bit more about what spurred that decision to come to the UK. And you're still here.
Yeah. Well, the company is the reason I'm still here. So when I was in Asia, I almost over-indexed again because I was so close to manufacturing, and it felt like the company I was working for was really about executing on their clients' work, essentially.
Okay.
And I saw there was very little pushback. We had brilliant ideas, and I worked with some of the best designers I've ever worked with in Taiwan, but I don't think that their creativity and like the industrious nature of how they would approach a problem ever shine through because it would come down to the cost. Or it would come down to what the client wanted versus like, hey, I think it's healthy for us to push back. A, we can make a more sustainable design. B, we can make a design that looks better.
Yeah, more quality work.
And maybe C, it just makes the whole manufacturing process a lot lighter. But I think when you're in that environment of like, I take a brief and I will execute on that brief.
Yeah. There's not much room, even psychologically, for you to feel like you can move the needle.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was like where I was like, okay, my time's up here, really, because I don't think there's much I can do. I'm not going to shift a culture. I'm not going to shift a business model for a business. But one of the things I was like, I can't just kind of keep oscillating between these two worlds. Like maybe I need to find a discipline that kind of sits in the middle, and like I should be hired under that discipline. Like here's a person that we want to bring into our organization to help bridge the two worlds.
Yeah.
And so I started to look at like, is there a discipline that actually exists between the two? And it was very hard to find. And I don't think there was pretty much anything I actually found that was like an engineering design.
Merge of both at the time. Is it more common now, this notion of both, than it was before?
I'm not sure. I think academically there's still like some emerging disciplines and degrees that provide that. But at the time, the only thing I found closest was like IDEO, which is a consultant.
Yeah, I remember IDEO.
Yeah. So like I was like, okay, this is cool. Maybe I can work for someone like them. But I did find that I wanted to actually have a bit more formal educational training in design. And so I started to look at like, what should I model myself after? And I tried a couple of different schools and I saw their programs, like just going online and checking it out. But I keep stumbling across the RCA in Imperial College, London. And one of the big reasons for me to take that jump was James Dyson did the exact same course I did. So,
wow.
Did not know that.
yeah, so I was like, here's
That's the
a
Dyson
blend.
empire, like the fans and everything.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was like, here's a blend of like design and engineering done really well with marketing. And so here's a designer that is, multi-billionaire, I believe. And so like, okay, this is probably a safe
And
bet
there's a lot
to go
of
after.
engineering IP under the design with Dyson. There's
Exactly.
that merge of design and actual engineering, like craft.
The brand has done it very well.
Yeah.
And so if there's anything to like kind of model my background off of, I think this would be a smart move. Yeah. So that's why I was like, okay, coming here for my master's would do the trick.
And was the plan to go back to the US after?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It was like 2 years in London.
Didn't want to enjoy the lovely British weather.
Going back. But to be fair, I started to see so many opportunities in the UK, and like in the US, I feel like an opportunity pops up and then like immediately it's full, or immediately like it's oversubscribed, right? Whereas in the UK, I don't know. People I don't feel people are as hungry, or at least there's not as many hungry people.
Yeah, or maybe it's like No, I totally hear you. I would love for us to like segue into GravitySketch first. It's a very peculiar name. I was thinking about it and I was like, it makes sense. GravitySketch, exactly what it's trying to do. And I loved, I think somewhere you said online that what you're trying to build is pretty much bridge what is in your head into like a 3D, like a virtual. It's like that gap in between. There's a lot that happens when you think of something and you have to create it, and you want to bring that together. So maybe for the benefit of people who don't know about GravitySketch, what is it? Like very simply, if you had to explain it. And then also I'm curious about the origin story of the name.
Okay, yeah. I wish my co-founder was here. She describes it better than me. So GravitySketch is a 3D design platform. Essentially, you can think of an idea and you can kind of wave your hand in 3D space to fabricate that idea in real time. Now, obviously, it's not a physical interpretation, but a digital interpretation of your idea. We use virtual reality. We also use desktop and web-based technologies to bring that idea to life. But it's also collaborative by nature. So in the simplest form, if I wanted to, let's say I wanted to create a flower, I would just draw and then draw in midair with the virtual reality controller and the virtual reality headset. And then let's say you guys were also in the virtual space, you would see that thing floating in 3D space. You can make comments, annotations, and then we can collaborate on that. Now we're seeing that it's being used in like bigger industries such as automotive, and we're getting a huge pull into the footwear and apparel industry because these products are very hard to manufacture because they have so many complex curves and forms because the human body is at the center of what these things are, right? Whereas if you're creating a table or a laptop, it's kind of detached from the human. And so we get the most of our engagement in that space because scale is important and the fit and finish is really important. But we've seen huge use cases across the community in things like medical, things like media and entertainment. No, not at all. But this is why we made the product free. So the product's free.
Oh, you made it free, and
and then we have an enterprise version.
Okay.
And just making it free opens up the doors for everyone to at least participate and
you can learn as well.
How they would apply it. Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. So I would love to double click on the origins of the idea, because as you speak, I can it's logical in retrospect. It's like these two parts of yourself. There's the design, there's the creation, there's the fact that you actually like to create, and you're trying to simulate that experience in virtual like reality and augmented reality. What was the moment you think the idea went from just like a thought that kept nagging in your mind to transitioning to being a thing that was a bit more? And I know that there's nuance around the story given the at Imperial, like a lot of stuff. So I would love to hear the origin of some, because I think that for our audience, there are a lot of people that are probably in different stages in how they're thinking about stuff. So I think it'd be lovely to get that, perspective on what the origin was and how it kind of evolved into what it eventually became to be.
Yeah. Well, first it was academic, right?
Yeah.
We were looking at this
so it stemmed off a research topic.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's like this was our final year's work, and we were really looking at how do we have an impact on this creative industry, because we see that there's so many challenges for people to bring their ideas to life. And it seems like you have to be a designer to actually bring anything to life three-dimensionally. Whereas we've seen what happened with photography.
Yeah,
anyone could kind of pick up their phone now and become an amateur photographer. So how do we crack that for the 3D space and allow people to bring in reality more beautiful products?
So you kind of started with a problem statement, sounds like.
Yeah, definitely. And then we actually interviewed and examined a lot of different creative disciplines.
Okay.
And so we didn't really start with the technology. We were very much looking at like, how do people bring their ideas to life? And the underlying thing across it all was like, you have to know how to sketch, because sketching is the first way that you land your initial idea.
Right.
We've all heard napkin sketch, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to be able to communicate like through some sort of like 2D interpretation of what your 3D idea is. And most ideas are 3D, by the way.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's very rare that
really
you're thinking of a 2D idea. And so then we started to look at like what technologies can support this way of sketching into a 3D space, which we felt was like the right way to go about it. And that's when we started to go into this world of, augmented reality and virtual reality with very clunky devices, wires, and, going online and getting a bit of developer code and stuff like this. And we kind of pulled together a little bit of an experience. And then we went to those same people that we were interviewing, and we asked them to, draw a chair or draw a pair of eyeglasses or draw something in this new 3D thing that we had. It was a bit of a clunky bit of technology.
Yeah.
And, the little spark of like, I would say like hope or there's something in people's eyes when they start to use it. They were like, okay, this is actually we have something here.
Yeah.
But again, the market was really nascent.
Yeah.
Like, obviously you can't really build a scalable business. Even today, it's very difficult to build a scalable business in this space. So we decided to go and work at Jaguar Land Rover for a few years.
Okay.
And
Interesting.
do
So
this in the
after
background.
you started getting initial insights of that idea, you actually still decided to go work at Jaguar and then kind of come back to revisit it.
Well, we did this kind of, I would say like 70-30 or something like this,
Okay,
right? So
okay,
working
okay.
at Jaguar, because I also need a visa to stay here. I can't just stay in the UK.
Oh, I love that you said that, because I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs actually also have to navigate that as
Yeah,
immigrants,
that's true.
because you just can't, up and do because you're on a visa most times.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. So I didn't have that luxury.
yeah. So you kind of balance both, like 70-30.
And student debt.
There's
Like,
that.
I don't know. Like I never had a safety net like that. So even now, it feels sometimes like weird if I'm like not working.
Yeah.
If you don't work, you don't eat, and that does come from my childhood. So
That's really interesting that you hopefully that can get edited out, but that's really interesting that you worked at Jaguar, just simply because some of your clients today are car manufacturers, right? And so did you get the insight to the fact that this would be really valuable within the car design space from having worked there, or is that something that came later on?
Well, I feel like for every every founder, the first investor is yourself.
Yeah.
And
Ooh, I like that.
yeah, it is, right? Because like now you're saying I'm going to take either a pay cut or no pay, which is what we ended up doing for over a year or so. And I'm going to say that this is going to at some point either give me enough in knowledge or enough in monetary return. Like that's what you're essentially saying. And it was very difficult for me to say, okay, like I'm going to go all in on this. But after working about 2.5 years at Jaguar Land Rover, the little things that I started to observe, became big things, like back of the envelope calculation on how much money we spent on design resources, on the fabrication of these clay models that went to a scale.
Like there's a lot. Yeah.
Exactly. So I was just looking at, okay, and then I looked at like the hardware I had on my desk. The monitors are more expensive than the VR headsets that are on the market today, right? And so I started to build this real strong conviction that like we have a problem that we can solve, and then B, the problem that we can solve is actually worth a lot more than I initially thought. Because you keep in mind, my worldview before that, at least with the product design space, was like laptops, phones, furniture. And so seeing a vehicle, which is the most expensive thing you buy in your life outside of your home, and you buy it highly predicated on its aesthetic value. Okay, this makes sense. Like these companies are spending millions upon millions.
That gives you confidence.
Design.
You're like, okay, there's something here.
And I love
so
how
we saw
that
that
like
it works.
operational experience just gave you so much depth in terms of the insight of how valuable it could really be that you never had when you were a student. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what gave me the conviction to say, okay, I can.
There's something here.
Let me invest in this at least a year, learn something. It ended up being about 18 months or so, like no salary whatsoever, just kind of grinding it out.
I would love to talk about that.
Yeah.
Like, how do you? Because I think that again, especially when you don't have a safety net, that's one of the things that's often like it's kind of like a barrier for some. Like I want to build this thing, but I literally can't afford to build it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, how did you navigate that, especially given that you planned for like 12 months and it did extend? Like, so I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking, to be honest. Like, I don't know. You're just like, Well, I guess the way I kind of convinced myself was like, I invested so much in my academics.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe this is just in a continuation of this. Maybe this is my MBA, or maybe this is my PhD.
Oh, that's an interesting way to
So,
think about it.
yeah, I tried
because
to,
you do
like-
spend money on MBAs
Exactly.
and like, yeah.
I guess
Exactly.
it comes back to what you said, right? You are your first investor.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
almost like you saw it as an investment in yourself
Exactly.
by building
Yeah.
this thing that you had the vision for.
And I try to divorce the idea that like this has to give me monetary
Right,
return.
okay.
Because I think when you go down that route, you start making
Create
decisions
something, yeah.
that are based on
Yeah.
like whether or not I can get a monetary return.
Yeah.
So that was like the biggest thing I did was like, all right, let me just separate like this idea that I'm ever going to get anything back
Yeah.
from this
Okay.
experience aside from knowledge.
Yeah.
Which then made me like over-index on all these different opportunities for startups at the time, right? I would go to like almost every single like pitch kind of competition. I would go to all these different workshops, accelerators, just like learning as much as possible, because had this not been successful to the degree it is today,
Yeah.
I would at least have that information and knowledge to maybe try something else
Yeah.
or
Go
build
somewhere
a
else.
network,
Maybe
or
at a
go somewhere
corporate.
else.
Yeah, or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that was the way I approached it, but it was a very difficult time. But I would say that like it wasn't like there's no money out there
Yeah.
at the time. Definitely couldn't get investment because we were still trying to develop what the
Let's
product
talk
is in
about
the
that.
market.
Like, how did you
Yeah.
navigate the first check that allowed you to say, okay, we have a pot of money that we can use to try to validate this thing?
Yeah, I mean, it came in lots of different forms. Like
Okay.
the first, I would say the first proper money that we had into the business that was non-dilutive capital, actually.
Really?
Yeah, and it came from the Royal Academy of Engineering, and
Okay.
they had this program out for engineers that wanted to be entrepreneurial, and they still have the program going, actually.
Really?
Yeah, it's
Is that like widely known? Because I feel as if there's
That's the
quite a
thing,
lot
it's-
of opportunities
not
out
widely
there,
known.
but
Yeah.
people may not know about them, or just
Yeah.
the take up.
Yeah, exactly. It's not widely known. In fact, I think it's still a little bit undersubscribed.
Right,
Like
okay.
they'd like to actually get more people applying for this, so they had more people to kind of go through in terms of bringing them into each cohort that they build. But I think that's a really amazing opportunity. It's if you have an engineering background, if you have some sort of entrepreneurial idea that you want to pursue. They will give you a bit of money for yourself to
Yeah.
actually like live, and then a bit of money for your business
Okay.
to actually start investing and developing. But more importantly than the funds was you have a space right there in Piccadilly, like it's like a proper space to work.
Good location.
Yeah, and you have mentorship and guidance from people that have done this before. So that was really, I would say, like the first real money that came into the
Okay.
business. I think about 40,000, 50,000 pounds at the time. And then we started to see other opportunities like with Innovate UK
Yeah.
and a lot of these government
You
grants.
leverage those
All the time, yeah.
I would imagine, especially given like the technology was early. It's still early, but even
Yeah.
then, I imagine that you would have needed some more capital, like more patient capital, to kind of
Yeah.
validate a lot of the stuff you had.
Yeah, I think the other thing is like we never tried to like jump 2 feet in too early. Maybe in the
Right,
last couple
iterative,
years we
yeah.
did, but like we were always just let's focus on like the end user
Yeah.
and in this vertical,
Yeah.
transportation, or footwear, and even to this day we're like hyper focused. Now there's so many different applications for what we're building, but I think we can really harm ourselves if we were to go super
Yeah,
wide
yeah.
before the market
Yeah.
is mature.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the idea is to maintain this balance of not being too narrow into one vertical, but also not excluding ourselves from like all these other opportunities.
Because you could actually be surprised. Like people might take your technology to somewhere you're not kind of predicting.
Exactly, and you need to enable people to do that.
And I would love to talk. So first, you got the grant. Did you get the grant before you had a team? Because I would love to hear a bit more about like how you thought about, okay, this is becoming a thing beyond just a research project.
Right.
Need the first, people on board.
Yeah.
I can't do it alone, or I don't want to do it alone. How did you navigate your co-founder? Where did you meet them? How did you think about who was a fit? And how did you have the conversation as well? Because like, was it just a natural, you guys just knew, or is it more like an upfront conversation as well?
Yeah. So my co-founder with
How many co-founders?
the 2 co-founders.
Okay.
Yeah, and one co-founder we graduated, and this was our graduation project together.
Okay.
So Daniela and I were already kind of in it.
And did you both worked at Jaguar together?
Yeah.
okay.
We both worked at JLR together as well, and that was more like, back and forth kind of conversations. Like,
Yeah.
do we really want to do this? She's from Mexico, right? So
Yeah.
like, we both needed visas, and ultimately we decided to give it a year. It went
Yeah.
Okay.
beyond that a bit, but we still kind of stuck through it. But neither of us have that depth and technical background and knowledge. So we knew that we needed to bring someone in on that front. So we went on Upwork and we found an engineer on Upwork. Yeah.
Okay.
I love it.
And that was Daniel. And so brought Daniel in as a contractor, and we I paid him out of my salary essentially from Jaguar, just kind of like, we got obviously.
And was he full time at that point? Or was he?
No. He was contractor.
Okay.
So we were just
Also got
doing
some time to
contracts.
work together and kind of see if there was even like opportunity for
Exactly.
And then when was it? Because I feel as if like quite a lot of people are quite hesitant to bring someone in as a co-founder, right? So when did you have that aha moment that he was the one?
Or was it just logical? It was just like so natural. It's like, hey, let's just.
I think I started to see like more and more we worked together, the more and more he would bring up ideas or things that like I hadn't even thought about, right? It was like, okay, this guy's actually thinking beyond just like, here's an executable, here's the brief. But also we started to run out of money, right? So I'm like, at a certain point, like, I'm not going to be able to pay you to do this. Are you enjoying this? And so at the time, actually, the three of us went to my hometown. We went to Portland. I was just like, let's get out of London. Let's go and like, I feel like if you take people outside of the working environment,
You get to meet them.
you need to have a bit of reference for one another as human beings, right? And so we went and actually stayed at my family home, and like we did really weird, quirky Portland things, and went on hikes and stuff like this, and then I just presented the idea to Daniel and Danielle, like, why don't we bring Daniel in as a co-founder, and he resonated with the idea, and obviously hashing out like what the package would be, and the equity and all that stuff is always a bit of a tricky thing, but ultimately he just really loved the mission that we were on.
He's still with the business today.
And still with the business today. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. So I would love to talk about fundraising. You raised the grant, you got even more grants. You used some of your salary from Jaguar. When did you think VC was a viable option? Like, how did you approach that first VC funding, and when was it time-wise from when you started?
Yeah. So the company was founded in 2014, and that was like graduation.
Yeah.
Probably 2.5 years or so at Jaguar, a whole year of just kind of working it out.
Right.
And then I would say, was it about end of 2017 or so that we're like, okay, we now have something we can put out into the real world.
Yeah.
And we put that out on some of the platforms as a free product.
Yeah.
And like on the App Store, and then Steam was another platform that's like servicing all the VR stuff at the time. And we started to see a lot of people using the product. And so we put a little bit of a paywall, I would say, or kind of, not pay, what is it, like maybe like a blocker in place. So you can't just download the product for free. You had to give us a little bit of money through PayPal or whatever it was.
Oh, like a donation? Was it like, it was just,
Exactly, like a donation.
Ah, that's a great way to validate.
Yeah, and so we started to see a lot of people just indexing that. And so I think
that was before you even thought about fundraising.
Yeah, this is before fundraising. Because like, again, I think you have to convince yourself.
Right.
Again, and once you enter that relationship from a fundraising perspective, the course of your company changes quite a bit, because it's not just 3 people that own this business now. It's more. But in about a month and a half, we did about 10 grand in donations. And so.
And this was just like prosumer, I guess. Like,
this was all prosumer. Yeah. Right. And so I was on Instagram and stuff like that. I was texting people and DMing and like just saying, hey,
you're
like,
really hustling.
Yeah, you should try this out, because like you're an amazing designer, and like I think this could change the way that you design.
And at that point in time, was the headset a requirement? Did you need like
So and that's when like Oculus had released the headset. And so I think they released it mid 2016 or something like that. So we really rushed by 2017 to get something that was just out there on their platform for people to download and use. And so we used that initial momentum to say, okay, like, there's something here. And it was we need to be really quickly after, because like obviously the numbers could start going down, and so started to talk to investors at that point.
I love the timing of the raise, because there was momentum. I feel like it would have been much harder to have that conversation when you started off than later. So I think that was very smart. And then maybe on just evolution, it's one thing to have a team of 5 people where you guys are super in sync. It's one thing for you to then get funding and that start building out, and you have to start thinking about growth and maybe even culture. Like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you navigated growth. Because I personally believe that you almost need to be 2 different people. Like, the one who starts the business and the one who kind of thinks more scale and growth. And especially for your customer segment, it's B2B software as well. It's a very peculiar business model. tell me, how did you navigate that? Any points where you felt those pressure points, and how did you kind of, yeah.
I think I'm still navigating growth, to be honest.
It never stops.
Yeah. I would say like as soon as we started to go for investment, my whole mentality had to change to commercial mentality. So now that we have money in our bank and we have investors and we have board meetings and we have like kind of a more structured way of running the business, not super structured, but like more structured than before, I need to make sure that like we always have money coming into the business from investment and from customers, better from customers than investors, to be honest. And, you know, that was a huge change for me. And the biggest, I guess the one thing that really switched my gears was framing it around, I'm no longer designing a product, I'm designing a business. And so can I apply my design mentality and like my design approach to this business that I'm designing? How we sell, how we promote, how we, you know, talk with our customers and how we service our customers. And, you know, in a lot of ways, almost every design principle that I learned and that I developed through my work and through academics is applicable from the business context. And I think you see that with great businesses like Airbnb and so forth, right? Like they really do apply a design mentality to the business. But as you start to grow, there's things that break in the business, and ultimately you're not going to be able to work from first principles all the time. And so this is where I'm a huge advocate of mentorship. And an investor that joins your business should be helping you find like-minded individuals that may be just a few steps ahead of you in their journey, so you can learn from. Because if you're not learning from, you know, others that have walked the path before you, then you're kind of going to make the same unnecessary mistakes. Or I mean, sometimes they're necessary to make the same mistakes, but often you don't need to make the same mistakes.
And oftentimes, like that's something that I feel like is to some extent overlooked by entrepreneurs, right? When the term sheets come on the table and you're assessing which ones to go for, how do you determine which investor is going to provide the most value? So mentoring, as you mentioned, is something that is of huge value alongside a whole heap of other stuff. So good. You mentioned sales. So obviously you went from being prosumer to working with large enterprise clients. Talk to us about some of the nuances when it comes to sales, particularly around the sales cycles and so on, how you navigated that.
Yeah, again, I think the mentorship and going a little bit first principles at the same time was really important for us, because now we're selling to a designer, which oftentimes it's kind of a subjective sale in some ways. Like, I don't know if I want to use this because it doesn't feel good. But being a designer myself, I found that always getting in front of the end user and spending time talking with them and kind of understanding where their pain points are was the biggest advantage that we could take. Mainly because like if you don't understand the pain that you're solving for, then you're kind of, you know, it goes in one ear and out the other for most people. And since we don't have like this direct ROI, if you use this, it's going to give you this much in return. At the time, we didn't have that. So we really had to kind of almost back of the envelope calculate things. And the good thing is I had this automotive background. So true. I stuck with, you know, what I knew. I said, hey, look, this is what I observed working in Jaguar Land Rover. Do we have the similar challenges here at Ford? And then like, yeah, you know, we do. It's kind of like a bit like this or a bit like this. And you mind if I shadow you for the afternoon? And, you know, these vendors don't necessarily do that all the time. You know, like they might come in with a very heavy sales focus. And we always came in with this focus of like learning and researching.
I love that.
Yeah, exactly. It is one of our company principles, right? Yeah. And so that was one of the things that I think really helped us in the early sales process. But as we start to scale into like high 5-figure, 6-figure deals, we started to see that there's a lot of other heads that need to come into the conversation.
Yeah, talk to us about navigating those conversations where you're not just having to sell to the designer, you're not having to sell to like the head of a whole entire department, and you know the chief financial officer has to almost sign off on some of these large deals. So
I'm still figuring that stuff out. To be honest, it's not easy because it does boil down to like the return on their investment,
right?
And in many cases, how
do you demonstrate that?
In many cases, it's very difficult because, you know, a car takes about 6 years to get to the market, right? So it's like, well, here's a project that we did, or here's something else that we did. So we try to build internal communities now and advocates within the organization, so that if the product is taken away from them, they're going to kick and scream.
They're doing bottom up, and it sounds like, because it looks like customer love is so important to you, and I think honestly the best products are such like you use them and you can't live without them. And
Exactly.
everyone needs to get with the program.
Yeah. I think there's a place for, ensuring that you and the CIO have a similar vision and that
And is
you
that the
can
person you
scale.
tend to sell to, the chief innovation
Yeah,
officer?
yeah.
Okay.
We tend to sell into the CIO, and there is a bit of like discussion that needs to be had in terms of how much they're going to spend over what period of time, because they have to control their costs, and I think that's a reality that I also face as an entrepreneur. So I can get on the same page as them. But when we're talking to like large organizations as such that we work with right now, I think a lot of the objections are really around, the seasonality of the usage of the tool or some of these things. I think we can kind of talk through like logically, and then maybe we have to work backwards. Okay, here's where we're at right now. Here's where we want to get to. Here's how we can kind of bridge that. And so sometimes the business model has to be a bit flexible, especially like now they have 7-figure deals. It's like you've got to be a bit flexible, because you have to understand like how their spend is. And at a certain point, you look at other companies they spend with, and you're like, okay, they spend like quite a bit with Adobe, for example. So I know that we can get there. So it's good to like also know that like it's possible. That way you can then understand how to be flexible and like work your way to that over time. And these are multi-year deals, right? It's not something that you need to like land everything in that moment.
On that point, how long, do you think it takes to close one client? Like, I'm curious.
I mean, on average, our average right now is anywhere from 9 to 12 months. So like enterprise sales cycles are long, and that's almost the same length as the money that we bring in, like the budget, right? So investors also have to be very, aware or tolerant of a longer sales cycle. And, you have to be very engaged with the investors about where in the sales cycle you are with certain customers. So it's a different raise, it's a different motion. But the free product gives us a lot of life, because at least we see from the free product, the utilization goes up. We see that there's engagement, and that's quite helpful.
Cool. Now, Seyi, we met back in 2019, and at the time, the VR headsets were very clunky still. Obviously, now we have the Apple Pro, and the market has evolved quite significantly. I'd love to just hear your view on, what excites you today about where the market is today compared to back when you started out in 2014, and how do you see that having an impact on GravitySketch as you go forward?
Yeah, I mean, if I just talk about the technology space in general, the thing that's exciting me the most is that it's not necessarily AR or VR. It's the fact that we're trying now to communicate as close as possible through our technology as we do as humans. Like, there's a reason I'm sitting on the sofa with you guys versus like doing this over Zoom, right? Like, it has a different level of I guess, intimacy. And so this is really exciting me, because I feel like we've been waiting a long time talking through screens to get to a point where like we can interface with our technology in a much more humanistic way. Like, even just typing, for example, is such an extraction from, what we're used to doing as humans. If I can go into your home and go into your kitchen and fry an egg, I could probably figure it out really quickly. If I open up your laptop or your phone and try to navigate to an app, it's going to take me a while, right? And that's because there's so much complexity on the way that we compute. So this is the most exciting thing for me. And Apple stepping into the game definitely starts to bring this awareness in a place that I think the common person can understand how it might be beneficial to their life, whether it's from, entertainment or productivity. I think they do a really good job of highlighting this. But what this means for us is that we're one step closer to being more of a ubiquitous product. It could be something that geometry teachers use to help students understand the volume of a pyramid, right? Like, very simple things that we take for granted every day are actually 3D concepts that we need to understand as human beings, but we don't really have great tools to do that. So for us, it's closer and closer to being more of that, Adobe like kind of experience for the 3D space, which is really exciting.
We're excited to see.
I'm like now looking forward to the evolution of the world with AR on it.
Cool.
Just for us to close, because we're now getting to the end, one of the things we love to ask our guests is just from kind of like a retrospective standpoint. If you could go back in time, let's imagine there was a time machine, 2014, Seyi now goes back to Seyi then, you've got 1 minute. Tell Seyi something, just as he's making the decision, that you think he needs to hear.
It's going to be longer than you think. It's going to be longer than you think. And I would say trust your gut. So many times that I didn't trust my gut, and I made a lot of avoidable mistakes. And I think this is like really important. you are an entrepreneur for a reason.
Yeah.
You know, you started
Yeah.
this business for a reason. You have something that others don't, and you should definitely believe in that and trust that.
I love
Love
that.
that.
It's going to take longer than you think. Trust your God. You're
Absolutely.
an entrepreneur for a reason. I love it. Thank you so much, Shay, for coming. It was so
Thank you.
lovely to have
Appreciate it.
you.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
for the
Thank you all
discussion.
for joining in today. See you next time.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of The Startup Leap, TSL for short. Leave a review, tell us what you think of this episode on all our platforms at The Startup Leap Pod. Do you have a question? Ask us and we'll ask our guest. Go to thestartupleap.io. See you next time.